From an album Courtney Love curated to Trent Reznor's high-concept sound collage and a near miss with Kurt Cobain, today we're talking about the greatest movie soundtracks of the 1990s. As Iggy wildly danced around in front of a white backdrop to his 1977 classic Lust for Life, scenes from a world I wanted to know everything about were intercut. It looked grimy, cool, and forbidden. Then a word began popping up: Trainspotting. I had no idea what it meant, but I understood that it was a movie and they could not take my money fast enough. That was how movie soundtracks worked in the 1990s. They became a huge part of a film's identity and marketing campaign. In many cases, there would be multiple music videos from the soundtrack using footage from the films. A song like U2's Hold Me, Thrill Me, Kiss Me, Kill Me from the Batman Forever soundtrack would be in rotation for months, using the song to Trojan-horsed the movie into the minds of its core demographic.
This is a thing of evil.
While there were arguably bigger radio hits from movie soundtracks in the 80s, the pipeline that MTV created for these promo clips really peaked in the 90s. These soundtracks were one of the primary ways of discovering new bands in the 90s. The first time I heard the Pixies and Sonic Youth was on the Pump Up the Volume soundtrack.
Talk hard!
SFW was the first time I heard Radiohead. The albums became an active part of a record label's strategy to break their new artists. Today, we're taking a look at the best curated, most creative 1990s movie soundtracks that were at the top of everyone's Columbia House order list. And just a note, this list is focusing on 90 soundtracks comprised of alternative and rockish music from the era. So we'll be leaving off favorites like Forrest Gump, Dazed and Confused, Juice, Pulp Fiction, Reservoir Dogs, Above the Rim, Trainspotting, and Boogie Nights. They're all great, just not what we're here to talk about. So let's get started. During the production of The Crow, the film star Brandon Lee was tragically killed. This cast a pall over Alex Proyas's adaptation of James O'Barr's comic book before it was even released, and the soundtrack only extended that heavy atmosphere. Starting with The Cure's Burn, which was specifically written for the film, it continues with notably bleak offerings such as Nine Inch Nails' cover of Joy Division's Dead Souls and Rollins Band's cover of Ghost Rider, by a group whose name I can't say on YouTube. The soundtrack also explored darkness from outside of the standard MTV fare from more obscure acts like My Life with the Thrill Kill Cult and Machines of Loving Grace. While no two tracks sound alike, the whole album holds together surprisingly well, and for teens of the era, it's a perfect artifact of gloomy premillennial depression.
So what are you gonna do now?
Sing a song.
For my money, there was never anyone cooler in a role than Steven Dorff was as Cliff Spab in SFW. I've always been a huge fan of his acting, but the stars really lined up for this one.
Mighty big fucking key, huh?
I also spent my teenage years going through thrift stores trying to find this jacket. SFW's soundtrack featured Soundgarden, Hole, Radiohead, and Marilyn Manson. And what's interesting is that at that point, each of those acts were just about to become global superstars within the next year or two. Not a bad batting average for the music supervisor. The filmmakers also wanted to use Nirvana's All Apologies in the movie, as the screenplay was somewhat inspired by Kurt Cobain's life. Apparently he even saw the film and really responded to it. Unfortunately, he died before they got permission to use the song.
I'm getting off this roof in one piece.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Dorff shows up in two of the most memorable soundtracks of the decade.
Oh, incredible.
Judgment Night is a unique one. Before rap rock destroyed the airwaves, every track on this album paired a hip-hop artist with a rock or metal act. Some combinations made sense, like Sonic Youth and Cypress Hill, and other ones were insane, like Mudhoney and Sir Mix-a-Lot.
Oh my God.
Tool and Rage Against the Machine actually recorded a song for the album together, but neither were happy with the results, so they scrapped it. The real standout is Teenage Fan Club and De La Soul's contribution, Fallen, which stands amongst the best of either of their catalogs.
This band is unstoppable. This weekend, we rock Portland.
The single soundtrack acted as a grunge starter pack for a lot of folks. Stemming from Cameron Crowe's underperforming film about dating in the heyday of the Seattle scene, it features Alice in Chains, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Mudhoney, Screaming Trees, and unfortunately just one female-fronted act, the Lovemongers. It was Nancy Wilson's band, who was married to Cameron Crowe. It's unfortunate. 7-Year Bitch, The Gits, the Fastbacks were all part of the same scene and would have made great additions.
Well, there have been a few flipper babies.
The Kids in the Hall TV show was brilliant and important. I remember watching it when I was 10 years old and just having my mind blown at how funny weird could be.
Well, that's not just a bad man, son. And there's Hitler. He's just your pet donkey.
So far we've been focusing on the grunge and alternative side of the 90s, but this one is keenly focused on the indie college rock side of things. With tracks from Pavement, Liz Phair, Guided by Voices, Stereolab, and Yola Tango, this album opened a lot of doors if you didn't grow up in a big city. After discovering this, all of a sudden labels like Matador and Drag City were very important to me. Coming out in 1996, it provided a roadmap for a life after grunge.
Oh yeah, well you were not here for the fucking food.
In the mid-90s, Paul Thomas Anderson says he sat down to write an adaptation of Aimee Mann songs. The result was Magnolia, a sprawling collection of interrelated characters looking for the meaning of love and life in the San Fernando Valley.
I lost my gun today when I left you, and I'm the laughingstock of a lot of people.
Appropriately, the majority of the soundtrack for the album was made up of Aimee Mann songs. Many were already written, but Mann penned You Do and Save Me specifically for the film. The soundtrack functions more like a score, as the song's lyrics seem to come directly from the characters' minds, literally at one point in the film. It was not only an exciting and unique approach of how music can be used in a movie, but also showcased Mann at her absolute peak.
This is so beautiful.
Beautiful. Wallpaper is beautiful. You're now looking at the human soul.
Until the End of the World is Wim Wenders' 4-hour sci-fi epic, an incredible movie that's more relevant today than when it was released. Despite coming out in 1991, it still somehow feels like a perfect analogy for the dangers of social media. The soundtrack is centered around U2's contribution, a song that was titled after the film and later ended up on Achtung Baby. Where most of the albums on this list caught acts on the way up, Until the End of the World features modern works from previous generations of artists. What's Good by Lou Reed, Last Night's Sleep by Can, and Calling All Angels by Jane Siberry. The album is filled with weird, beautiful, meditative songs that all float by in a dreamlike quality that suits the film perfectly.
It's just murder, man. All God's creatures do it in some form or another.
I have no memory at all if this movie is any good. It was such a heated cultural talking point for a few years after it came out. It's interesting that the film never really comes up anymore. Either way, the soundtrack is pretty fascinating. Trent Reznor assembled it at the height of his popularity, aiming to make a sound collage, merging songs and overlaying clips from the movie. It features a few Nine Inch Nails songs, 2 tracks from Leonard Cohen's album The Future, as well as Bob Dylan, Dr. Dre, and the Dog Pound. This is probably the most stylistically diverse offering on the list, and while it does stray from our 90s only rule, I find that there's an interesting dynamic between the older songs and the modern works. Case in point, Nine Inch Nails' A Warm Place blending into Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan's Allah Muhammad Shahriyar.
Sky rockets in flight. Afternoon delight. Hey, afternoon delight.
I wish I could say I was one of the people that discovered Elliott Smith before Good Will Hunting, that I stumbled upon Roman Candle in a used record store and it changed me forever. I was 14 years old though, and probably way too focused on finding all the Nirvana Outcesticide bootlegs for that ever to happen. When the Good Will Hunting soundtrack came along though, I was ready. The number of things that lined up for this to happen still fascinates me. Matt Damon and Ben Affleck essentially come out of nowhere to write this really beautiful script. Gus Van Sant agrees to direct it and brings along the idea of using Elliott Smith's music. And then Elliott shows up with Miss Misery for the movie. It's not his best song, but it's a song that had the best chance of transcending to a mainstream audience. Add all of those stray elements together and you get this.
Do you miss me?
The rest of his songs chosen for the record are beautiful bummers. They're really well curated and play a similar role that Aimee Mann's music did in Magnolia, and really nicely built out the texture of the environments featured in the film, from Dandy Warhol's Boys Better to the Waterboys' Fisherman's Blues.
I have 2 words for you. Brush your teeth!
The Tank Girl soundtrack was actually assembled by Courtney Love. She always seemed like a being of such perpetual motion. It's tough for me to imagine her wanting to sit down and assemble a playlist comprised of other modern artists. Well, it featured a song Scott Weiland recorded specifically for the film under the moniker The Magnificent Bastards, as well as tracks by Devo, Ice-T, and Bush. The core of this soundtrack is a lineup of some of the most prominent female artists of the day, including Bjork, Belly, Portishead, Veruca Salt, and of course Hole. It's kind of like the anti-singles in that regard, but similarly to singles,
Get up! Pal!
the soundtrack is much better than the movie.
Wait a minute, man. I don't want to hear anything negative.
In addition to that list, I'd like to give an honorable mention to the soundtracks for Batman Forever, Lost Highway, Empire Records, Romeo and Juliet, Clueless, and Pump Up the Volume. Let me know what you think I missed, and thanks for tuning in.